It started as noise. Miller cut across her once, twice, three times. 6 interruptions in a row, his voice sharp, his tone mocking, his hand chopping the air as if volume could erase her words. The panel laughed nervously. The chairman tapped his gavel, but the interruptions kept coming. 6 times in less than 10 minutes. But on the 7th, Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She delivered one line, calm, surgical, devastating. And for the first time all night, Stephen Miller had nothing left to say. Stay with us. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe because her 7th line is the moment the silence hit harder than his shouting. The hearing wasn't built for fireworks, but Miller brought matches. The chamber was meant to be neutral. Polished desks, a row of microphones glowing red, cameras rolling from the back wall. A congressional subcommittee hearing on immigration policy, the kind of forum designed for quiet records and procedural debates. But the moment Stephen Miller leaned into his microphone, neutrality vanished. He didn't wait for the chairman's full introduction. His voice cut in sharp, confident, rehearsed like a campaign rally line. What we're hearing from Miss Crockett is nothing but open border nonsense. Reporters stirred, pens scribbling faster. The chairman raised his hand for order, but Miller had tasted the air and liked it. He leaned forward, his tone dripping with sarcasm. She can spin it however she wants, but the American people aren't buying it. They never have. Crockett sat poised at her desk, shoulders square, hands folded, her gaze steady. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She let Miller's words pile up like kindling. When the chairman finally nodded for her to respond, she began calmly. What I was saying, what you were dodging, Miller cut in. That was the first interruption. The gallery murmured. Crockett tried again, her voice measured. The facts are clear. The facts are clear. You're wrong, Miller barked. Second interruption. By the 3rd, the panelists shifted uncomfortably. By the 4th, the gavel tapped harder. By the 5th, Miller's smirk widened as if he were tallying each cut. By the 6th, the room wasn't laughing anymore. It was bracing. And still, Crockett hadn't raised her voice. Her silence between interruptions became its own rhythm, her composure sharper than his noise. She waited, steady, as the interruptions stacked. 6 interruptions built the storm. The 7th would break it. By now, the tally was unmistakable. Staffers whispered it under their breath. Reporters jotted it in the margins of their notes. That's 5, now 6. Every time Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, Stephen Miller's voice cut across her like a blade, sharp and mocking. She began again. The truth is you want chaos at the border, Miller snapped. The 6th interruption, the chairman slammed his gavel. But Miller, allow the congresswoman to respond. But Miller leaned back smugly, arms crossed, satisfied. The interruptions weren't slips. They were strategy. He believed dominance came from volume. Crockett sat perfectly still, her pen resting lightly between her fingers. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't sigh, didn't crack. Her stillness was unnerving, and the cameras caught it. When the chairman nodded for her to continue, she leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Miller, you've interrupted me 6 times now. 6 times in less than 10 minutes, the gallery stirred. Miller chuckled, loud enough for the microphones. That's because I won't let lies go unchecked. Crockett's gaze locked on him, her tone sharper now, though still steady. If truth can't survive a sentence without you shouting it down, then maybe it isn't truth you're afraid of. Maybe it's the answer you don't want heard. The chamber gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers zoomed in on Miller's tightened jaw. For the first time, Miller leaned forward, his voice rising higher. I'm not afraid of you, Congresswoman. You don't intimidate me. But Crockett didn't flinch. She replied softly, almost too softly, forcing the room to lean closer. Good. Then let's see if you can survive my 7th line without interruption. The tension spiked. The room held its breath. The 7th interruption came like a hammer. Crockett's reply came like a scalpel. Crockett leaned into her mic, beginning again. Here are the facts about border security. Miller lunged forward, jabbing the air with his finger. Facts? You wouldn't know a fact if it hit you in the face. You've defended lawlessness at every turn. Congresswoman, and everyone here knows it. That was the seventh. The room tensed. Reporters froze their pens mid-stroke. Even the chairman stopped his gavel halfway, waiting. The moment stretched. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't cut back with an insult. She let Miller's words hang in the air like smoke, then leaned closer to the microphone. Her voice was clear, deliberate, unshaken. Mr. Miller, you've interrupted me 7 times tonight, and every one of those interruptions says more about your fear than my words. Because if you weren't afraid of the truth, you'd let me finish a sentence. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Some gasped outright. Reporters scribbled furiously, circling the line. Cameras zoomed in on Miller's face. Red, tense, his smirk collapsing. Crockett wasn't finished. She lifted a folder and held it up. And since you like facts so much, let's read your own. In 2015, you wrote in your policy memo that America's challenge is not immigration, but mismanagement. That's your quote, your words. And yet tonight you sit here shouting that immigration itself is the disaster. So which Stephen Miller are we supposed to believe? Gasps again. The contradiction landed heavier than the line itself. Miller stammered, his voice cracking slightly. That's taken out of context. But the room wasn't buying it. The cameras caught him fumbling, his papers rattling under his hands. Crockett lowered the folder, her voice calm but final. The truth doesn't need 7 interruptions. Lies do, and you just proved which side you're standing on. The silence afterward was louder than any shout. Even Miller didn't speak. He leaned back in his chair, lips tight, his hand gripping the desk. The storm of interruptions had ended. What remained was silence, and silence belonged to Crockett. For the first 30 minutes, Stephen Miller had set the tone. His voice filled the chamber, cutting across Crockett again and again. He looked like the aggressor, the man in control, the one dictating the tempo. But after Crockett's 7th line, their calm, cutting, undeniable, the tempo broke. The panelists leaned forward, their pens stilling. A senator who had smirked during Miller's earlier jabs now looked away, adjusting his glasses as though embarrassed to have smiled. The chairman, who had hammered his gavel uselessly before, now sat still, letting the silence carry the weight Crockett had created. Miller, red-faced, tried to recover. He shuffled his papers, leaned forward, and barked, "This is all political theater." She doesn't have answers, just slogans. His voice cracked slightly at the edges, desperation sneaking in where confidence once was. But the room didn't react. No murmurs, no nervous chuckles, no applause. The force of his outburst evaporated into stillness. Crockett leaned forward, her tone deliberate. "Mr. Miller, you keep saying I don't have answers, but every time I try to give them, you cut me off. That's not debate. That's fear." The audience in the gallery shifted audibly. Someone whispered, "She's right," loud enough for nearby mics to catch. Miller forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. He jabbed his finger in her direction. "I don't fear you. I fear what your policies will do to America." Crockett didn't blink. "Then let America hear them. Stop shouting and start listening." The line landed with a gravity Miller couldn't match. The panel sat frozen, reporters scribbled furiously, and the cameras cut to Miller's face, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing, his shoulders sagging under the weight of stillness. The control of the room was gone, and it wasn't Miller who had it anymore. What froze the chamber in silence ignited the country in noise. By the time the chairman's gavel tapped again, the clip had already left the room. Reporters in the gallery had posted it to Twitter before Miller even finished adjusting his microphone. The 35-second video showed him jabbing his finger, shouting down 6 times in a row, and then Crockett's calm, piercing line, "The truth doesn't need 7 interruptions. Lies do, and you just proved which side you were standing on." The internet did the rest. Within minutes, hashtags erupted. 7th line, Crockett versus Miller, truth wins. TikTok creators looped the clip with captions like, "Volume versus composure." On Instagram, side-by-side photos spread. Miller red-faced, mid-shout, Crockett steady and silent. Inside the chamber, the ripple was immediate. Staffers who had kept their heads down suddenly leaned toward their phones. watching the numbers climb in real time. Aides passed notes along the dais, some with underlined words. It's viral. Miller tried to plow forward, his voice louder, his gestures sharper. Don't be fooled. This is political theater. She hasn't answered a single real question. But it was too late. The feeds weren't quoting him anymore. They were quoting her. News alerts pinged across screens. Crockett shuts down Miller after 6 interruptions. Cable networks cut into live programming to play the clip on repeat. Talk radio hosts dissected the silence between her words. Crockett didn't lean into the chaos. She stayed composed, her hands folded, her eyes steady. The more she said nothing, the more the clip grew. A reporter in the gallery whispered to her colleague, "This isn't a hearing anymore." "This is a viral moment," the other nodded. He just gave her the stage by trying to take it away. And outside the chamber, the story had shifted. It wasn't about immigration policy anymore. It wasn't about Miller's arguments. It was about 6 interruptions, 1 reply, and 9 words that left him silenced. Sometimes the chamber speaks louder in silence than in sound. Stephen Miller kept talking, but the weight was gone from his words. His voice rose, his finger jabbed the air, his papers rustled violently against the desk. Yet the force that had seemed unstoppable in the first minutes now felt like a desperate echo. Across the dais, senators who had once nodded along now sat still, their expressions neutral at best, uneasy at worst. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly, lips pressed to a thin line. Another adjusted his glasses, avoiding the cameras, as if not wanting to be seen caught in Miller's corner. The gallery wasn't hiding their shift either. Aides whispered to each other, one scribbling a single line in the margin of his notes. He lost it on the 7th. Reporters no longer looked up at Miller when he spoke. Their pens flew only when Crockett opened her mouth. And Crockett? She didn't move much. She didn't have to. She sat poised, steady, letting Miller's flailing fill the air while her composure emptied it of meaning. Each time the cameras cut to her face, calm, unshaken, it told the story clearer than any headline. The chairman's gavel rested on the desk, unused now. Order wasn't necessary. The silence between Miller's rants was doing the work. One journalist leaned toward another, whispering, "This is the picture." He looks rattled. She looks in control. That's what they'll show on the news tonight. And indeed, the photographers focused their lenses on the contrast. Miller's reddened face, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes darting with frustration, while Crockett's expression remained composed, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Even the guards stationed at the back of the room shifted subtly, no longer tense but relaxed, as though they too sensed the battle was over. The defeat wasn't in Miller's words. It was in his face, in the stillness of those around him, in the quiet nods of jurors and the whispers of staffers. 6 interruptions built his storm. Her 7th line ended it. Stephen Miller was still trying to fight his way back. His voice cracked as he repeated the same charges again. Lies! Total lies. She doesn't care about America, she just cares about sound bites. His words tumbled louder, but not sharper. They bounced off the silence in the chamber like fists against stone. Crockett leaned forward slowly, folding her hands on the desk. She waited until his last syllable hung limp in the air, and then, without raising her voice, she spoke into the microphone. "Mr. Miller, interruptions don't make you strong. They make you afraid. And if you need to shout me down 7 times in 10 minutes, then you've already admitted your case is weaker than mine." The chamber went still. Miller blinked, opened his mouth, but nothing came. His jaw tightened, his papers shifted, but his voice failed. Crockett leaned back, her gaze steady, and gave her cold close. "You interrupted me 6 times. On the 7th, you interrupted yourself." The silence that followed was devastating. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers snapped the moment Miller leaned back, stunned, his eyes darting down at his notes. The chairman didn't strike the gavel. He didn't need to. The silence was louder than order. Crockett sat calmly, saying nothing more. Her composure was the final word. Was Jasmine Crockett right to shut Stephen Miller down with her 7th line? Or did she go too far? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you missed our last story, Tim, Joel Osteen told security to remove John Kennedy. Then he did this. Go watch it now. Don't forget to hit subscribe because the next clash will be even bigger.